Your Excellencies, and very, very distinguished and esteemed guests. I'm Al Bloom, Vice Chancellor of NYU Abu Dhabi, and I'm honored and very, very delighted to welcome you to this very special event. NYU Abu Dhabi is quite proud to host, in collaboration with the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs, an evening that brings together leaders of this society who distinguish the UAE as a nation that seeks a more responsible, cooperative, and constructive world. Representatives from across its institutions of higher learning who share commitment to preparing students for shaping that more responsible, cooperative, and peaceful world. And friends of NYU Abu Dhabi, who so importantly, by your presence here, support the intellectual vitality and the global vision of this university. It is an extraordinary privilege for all of us to host, as our distinguished speaker tonight, His Excellency Ranko Krivokapić, President of the Parliament of Montenegro and President Emeritus of the Organization for Security and Cooperation of the European Parliamentary Assembly, the world's largest intergovernmental organization dedicated to peace and to security. A leader in multicultural consensus building in his own nation and his own region, and a global leader dedicated to a world anchored in international security, mutual understanding, and trust. It is my great pleasure to invite Philip Kennedy, Professor of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies and Comparative Literature at NYUAD, General Editor of the Library of Arabic Literature, and Vice Provost of the NYUAD Institute for Public Programming, to introduce our guest speaker. I know this evening will inspire and instruct our collective resolve to recognize human commonalities across the divides of our world, and to build on those commonalities bonds of understanding and of peace. Thank you for being here, sir, and Philip.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Bloom. It's a great pleasure for me to reiterate many of the remarks you've made. Welcome everybody to the Institute. سعادات الكرام سيداتي سادتي مرحبا أهلا وسهلا نتمنى أن نشوفكم في جلساتنا على التوالي. So, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, welcome to the Institute. For those of you who have not been to any of our events before, we hope that this is not the last time we see you here. We have events very often through the year and hope that you will become part of our community. Let me read something about what the subject of today is, and then say something about His Excellency Ranko Krivokapić. In May of 2006, Montenegro declared its independence. This internationally recognized referendum marked a major milestone for a country as it emerged from the conflict of the 90s that had defined its regional neighborhood. The post-referendum report assessed that the competitive environment was marked by an active and generally peaceful campaign, and that, quote, there were no reports of restrictions on fundamental civil and political rights, end quote. His Excellency Ranko Krivokapić, the current President of the Parliament of Montenegro and President Emeritus of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in the European Parliamentary Assembly, just mentioned by Vice Chancellor Bloom, shares his thoughts on how nations can build on security and safety to realize stable development in spite of current worldwide political turmoil. The talk focuses on coexistence of cultures and the connections between security and different cultures and religions. It also addresses the current challenges faced by the OSCE, the largest security organization in the world. But first, a few words about His Excellency. Born on the 17th of August in 1961 in Kotor, he has a BA in law and studied for an MA at the Faculty of Law in Belgrade in the field of international relations. During his studies, he visited the Congress of the United States of America, as well as British Lloyd's in London. He has been president of the Parliament of Montenegro since 2003, but he was first elected as an MP to the Parliament of Montenegro back in 1989, and then subsequently to the Parliament of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia from 1993 to 97, and after that to the Parliament of the State Union of Serbia and Montenegro from 2003 to 2006. Following the referendum on the legal status of Montenegro, he led the process of writing the Declaration of Independence of Montenegro, declared on the 3rd of June 2006. As well as being current President of the Parliament of Montenegro, he is also President of the country's Social Democratic Party. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome His Excellency Ranko Krivokapić.
Assalamu alaikum, dear representatives of the Academia of the Free Will and Free Mind. Your Excellencies, it's truly an honor for me to come this deep into the heart of Arab world for this first time, and to have an opportunity to address the future leaders of that part of the world, as well as the world in general. At that moment, and the moment marked by yet another abuse of religion by terrorist policies. Murder of journalist Charlie Hebdo must remind us all of the great religions teach and promote good, and not only good, never evil. People do evil for the sake of their own interests, not for the God. Dear all, we belong to the small portion of the global population, the educated ones, who led the world towards progress. Thus, you have to be aware already of that responsibility. Your knowledge should not be governed by the word that runs in your veins. Now, veins is the tradition only, but also by the word that used to be the synonym of injustice in the past, but is now a partner in development of the new world of peace and development. This will never be a final attainment, but it's up to you to build in your own brick into the lighthouse of humanity, reason, and progress. It has always been the case, but now even more so, that the wise ones must learn the truth from everyone. I witnessed the tragedy and disintegration of a country that was one of the founding nations of the non-alignment movement, as the greatest political force that the Third World ever had. Tito's Yugoslavia fell apart in a war because the elites were not capable of leading in towards democracy and the role of institutions when its founder was gone. You, as the elites of the 21st century, must be ready to courageously build a time in which your world will develop its own model of democracy, adapted to your traditional and the ability of your societies to change with the changes of the globalism, the new epoch of humankind. Dear students, your excellencies, I come from Montenegro, a small country, but with 1,000-year-old statehood and freedom. We were the only independent state when the Balkans was ruled by two great empires, the Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian one, for centuries. We defended our freedom from the Ottoman Empire, but when Montenegro recovered its territory in the 19th century, which is now populated by the Muslims, our King Nicola did something different than all the other Christian rulers of that region. He let the Muslims keep their army units and the command over them, as well as Sharia as the leading law for them next decade. In those times, Montenegro already had a civil code, which was one of the best in Europe, together with Austro-Hungarian and French. This wisdom of our king from 19th century served as a seed of rightness, vision, and trust that resulted in a religious harmony in Montenegro that exists for almost 2 centuries now. Respected guests, the revolution of the Arab world following the World War II resulted in national, collective, and individual freedoms. The colonial tasks were taken of the nations ready to make a strong step forward. The very birth of Islam in the 7th century responded to some sort of national revolution. Islam brought life more adequate for the desert environment and more open for novelties. This is one of the basic reasons why in only 90 years from its creation, it became the greatest power on the Levant and on the Mediterranean. I know that in our European home, there are those that believe that democracy isn't compatible with Islam. Doesn't that mean that we are showing doubt in the strength of our core ideas? Lack of faith that the civil democracy and human freedoms are not indispensable? That's the question for us, Europeans. If the French and American Revolution could have made secular civic countries after 5th centuries of silence, of strong domination of religion, if the slaves from Haiti could have fought for their rights along the sound of the Marseillaise, do we have the right to doubt the strength of the powerful Arab nation now in the era of the internet, égalité, fraternité, and liberté? Arab nation has preserved all of our antique manuscripts, and through Spain, thanks to Ambassador of Spain, he is with us, thoughts about mathematics, navigation, melioration, and the other skills that have helped Europe to lead mankind for the last 5 centuries. Let us recall that it is very exactly an Islamic country that was the first one to recognize the results of the American Revolution. The first country to recognize the United States was Morocco. At the occasion of signing the treaty in Tripoli in 1796, the US President John Adams wrote, "The United States has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of the Muslims." Fight for the multiculturalism and multi-religious cohesions will not end as long as there are continuous sources of prejudice in our education and our tradition. This is not accidental that the thought, I'm quoting, "the ink of the scholars is more serum than the blood of the martyrs," represents an important part of the Islamic tradition. Opposite to stereotypes about Islam as a religion of the sword, which exists for so long in the West, Islam civilization is civilization of reason and the pen. Only such civilization was able to make Cordoba by far the most civilized city in Europe in the 10th century. The great library of Cordoba had 400,000 books. That was much more than all the books in the rest of Europe in that period. And this fact can also be explained by cultural exchange. Islamic world learned from China the skills of paper making 4 centuries before Europe did so. The concept of modern diplomacy, open borders, numerous academic disciplines, including anthropology, numerous medical discoveries, even manners, were taken over by the West from the Spain ruled by Moors. We owe the Islamic civilization gratitude for the magnetic compass and other navigation devices without which it would be very difficult for the European powers to sail around the world and bring numerous treasures, cultural and material ones, to Europe from the New World. During the Middle Ages, Islam was far ahead of Christian Europe with its openness and tolerance. In the Islamic world, including the Ottoman Empire, there was enough room for the Christians and Jewish. Following the Reconquista and the exodus of Sephards Jewish, they found shelter in the Ottoman Empire, and the Sultan himself was pleased to receive them and the people of the skills and crafts. All of them were recognized, registered, and 6 centuries later, their names still exist in Istanbul archives. Islam is an inseparable part of the key historical achievements, not only the wars. With the help of the Islamic libraries and the encounter between the Christian Europe in Toledo in 1085, with the preserved and explained ancient scholars, the opportunity was created for Renaissance to occur, without which we will not have Europe that we know today. Europe of multiculturalism that results in universal values in politics, culture, economy. If the great Islamic Mughal Empire Akbar was able to gather all the religious theology scholars in India in the 16th century to state that no religion has absolute knowledge and authority, his rule in India in the 16th century represents the period of rationalism in Europe in the 18th century. In those times, the Elizabeth I, Queen of England, a well-known Queen of England, sent him the letter in which she congratulates him for this humanity towards all religions. If Akbar and Elizabeth I were able to do so in the 16th century, then we have to start from there in the creation of the new interdependent Western-Eastern world, finally, one world of freedom for all. Islam represents an integral, inseparable, and irreplaceable part of Europe, its culture, history, and tradition. Islam is a part of the European past, present, and future. Europe, then I'm determined to develop further together with you, Europe of diversity, political, and religious tolerance. This is not Europe of conflicts, but rather civilization interwoven into one. Europe that learned the lessons from its colonial past, Europe that is determined to build a relationship of a partner with the Islamic world and not of a master. Dear friends, we in the Western Balkans, less than 2 decades ago, have witnessed populism and religion radicalism that replaced one-party system. Instead of blossoming democracy that we expected, this system has caused the bloodiest conflict on European soil in the second half of the 20th century. History's open possibility. This is what, at that time, non-united and institutionally unformed European community didn't understand. They believed that the democracy would come inevitably. The time has shown, both on the Balkans and in the Arabic Spring, that instability can easily follow the collapse of one system, and that the road to democracy is long, complex, and uncertain. We directly expressed the unbreakable tie between security and stable development, the fact that security is prerequisite for overall development of all society. But there are no challenges we have to face nowadays in the region to foster perspectives of both our stability and development. The issue of security, however, is still burning in Eastern Europe, despite the war and ethnic conflicts are behind us. Threats are, however, different from those that led to tragic conflict, but not less real. The first and the most obvious threat to security in Southeast Europe are organized crime and corruption. Corruption and organized crime are now forms of old occurrences, which used to shake the fundamentals of our states. In our region, they have a special strength gained during the last 2 decades of strong historical changes. War criminals have been replaced by actors of organized crime. As we were late in introducing reforms, it became more and more efficient. As we underestimated its power, it became systematically influential. Corruption and organized crime are phenomena not determined in ethical, state, or geographic manner. Their power lays in their transnational character and ability to compete by their organization with states and their capacities of effective interest corruption cooperating in fighting these occurrences. What represents a special challenge for our Balkan societies is the rule of law. There is no safety and security without the rule of law. Thus, no basis for stable development. The rule of law results in functional institutions capable of fighting all the security risks and causes of instability. For that reason, it is a prerequisite of general security and, on the other hand, of the trust of citizens in institutions and the state itself. And that is why we can say that development, primary economic one, is impossible without strong legal state and institutions that apply the law in an equal and non-selective manner. The rule of law is greatest guarantee for investors that wish to come to the region that their investments will be safe. Thus, the rule of law equally is important for the investors as it's for our Balkan societies. Ladies and gentlemen, I am here addressing you also in the capacity of the President Emeritus OSCE PA, the largest parliamentary assembly in the world, covering the area of 57 participating countries from Vancouver to Vladivostok, and contributing to the security of the world since 1975. Today, the OSCE represents the biggest regional security organization in the world, offering key contribution in 3 areas: security, human, and economic, environmental. The organization, since including both security and economic development elements, has been always aware of complementaries of these values. There seemed to be palpable lack of urgency on the part of OSCE institutions in responding to the Ukrainian crisis in the very beginning. After the crisis broke up, OSCE has shown great leadership working to de-escalate tensions in the country. As president of OSCE PA, I was first involved in this process. In April 2014, organized the meeting of Russian and Ukrainian parliamentary at the peak of the crisis. We met each other in Vienna. It was the important moment of the parliamentary diplomacy to show that we are capable to organize diplomatic contacts, not only using traditional channels, using parliamentary diplomacy like effective tool of diplomacy. In the world that is changed dramatically, response of OSCE must follow and adjust quickly. In the context of this process, Helsinki Plus 40 process surely deserves special attention. The Helsinki Plus 40 process represents the most recent attempt to revitalize the vision and the role of the OSCE in Euro-Atlantic and Euro-Asian security architecture and to increase its efficiency. Dear all, let me take this opportunity to refer to the Middle East conflict, which has unfortunately been a negative landmark of the region for decades. I'm afraid that this region is looking more and more like the Balkans of the 21st century. I don't need to remind you that an ability of so-called big forces to solve the Balkan issues as outcome of declining of Ottoman Empire at the end of 19th century. At the beginning of 20th century was casus belli, Sarajevo, Balkans, assassination of the Austro-Hungarian prince. It was casus belli of the World War I. Mere division of spheres of interest and observation of crisis areas as exclusively geostrategic post is recipe that heats and generates further conflicts. This is a lesson we must never repeat. The conflict is impossible to be solved if interests of those who share the destiny of one space are not satisfied. The long-lasting unsolved issues can easily lead to frustration and dissatisfaction at all sides. The potential reservoir for generating the conflicts and wide area, thanks to the law of the numbers, is even bigger here in the Middle East than it was in the Balkans 100 years ago. We cannot allow that the only constant be succession of conflicts from one place to another. This powder keg is filled for too much time. Let's know one thing, that conflicts can be permanently kept in the frozen or controlled state. We get closer to the time when it will no longer be possible to maintain the status quo, unless there is planned action aimed at creating a long-term sustainable and equitable solution. A space for the forces of destruction will be wide open. Controversies in the Middle East will be resolved or escalate, then is, I'm afraid, our reality. The trends are not encouraging. The elements of escalation in the region we all have seen during the 2014. These days, in the heart of Europe, we, unfortunately, see the tragic reflection of such escalation. I hope that recent appearance of ISIS, the force whose ideology is brutally anti-human, whose religion is totally opposite to the values of Islam, will be alarm for all of us that it's come a time to be at the level of our joint historic assignment to bring just and a sustainable peace in the region. That kind of regional peace which will be a driving force for overall global stability and long-lasting perspectives of our societies. Distinguished students, ladies and gentlemen, the world after the end of the Cold War entered a phase of only apparent stability. Our planet is surely spinning faster than ever in its existence. And this increasing further the uncertainty of the changes of the new epoch. Contours of the new global political architecture yet we only anticipate. What seems to be certain is that the pendulum of political and economic power is increasingly turning to the east. It is getting closer to the Chinese Pacific coast, the point where one of the oldest civilizations arose, around 5,000 years ago. The new epoch will have to remodel the predominant social and economic system. There are numerous signals that big, postponed questions are coming out to surface, seeking answers. The new epoch starts with an unbreakable tie between two walls, the Great Wall of China and the Wall Street. Who could have believed that Maoists and Marxists would save the symbol of financial capitalism, Wall Street, in 2008? It was clear that global rivals are more and more interdependent. The multipolarity is becoming a key feature of the global political landscape. Multipolar character of the 21st century must not be a world in which new walls will be built. It must not be the world predominantly burdened with the positioning of the already obvious continental holders of power. Such multipolarity demands a balance which will not be based on mutual fears and mistrust. Balance of powers based on mutual mistrust was introduced in the 19th century after Vienna Congress so-called Metternich system. Shortcomings were evident. At the end, it results in massive destruction of the World War I, whose 100th anniversary was marked last year. New multipolarity must be rooted on confidence, true cooperation, and fundamental and historically confirmed values. But we all have to be aware that such multipolarity must necessarily involve sharing the burden of preserving world peace and stability. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for a truly enlightening review of the risks and threats in the Balkans. My question relates to what you mentioned about the one of the major threats being organized crime and corruption. We have seen the rise of non-state actors across the Middle East, Europe, in the last 2 or 3 years. That rise has caused states to fear also for their borders and their stability. And we've seen situations where non-state actors have actually controlled territory and started to manage and administer those territories. My question is, do you consider the expansion of organized crime a form of non-state actors trying to establish territorial control, or is it a question of establishing influence and controlling existing states? Thank you.
You almost has given us answer. You have the power, you have the money. You need the state to protect that. And organized crime tried to create the states. They try to find weak states to corrupt the politicians. And you have the, let's say, political parties and politicians controlled by organized crime. It's cheap, and the cheap on the market is cheap to corrupt the politicians and political parties. On one side, you have, let's say, system to control financing of the parties. But who will control the cash? The new democracies, in the new countries, in the different part of the world. And organized crime with an enormous potentiality in the trade of the drugs, the other goods. They have capacities to corrupt parties, politicians, and to try to control the states. They don't need official power. They just need to control the states. And that's a real threat. Just in the new democracies, I not use the name of the continents, but on the few continents, you can get very strong influence on the politicians. And on the other side, it is all the model. One country could control the other country, financing the politicians in the other countries. If you have democracy, and all of us depend on the money for the campaign, if you know how much money somebody have on the elections, you'll easily understand who will be the winner of the elections. Using the medias, in the newspapers, using the influence on the public stage. That's the real threat, and that's the new threat. After the September 11th, we started to manage with the money laundering. We started to control financial system. But when you compare with them, we are on the beginning, because they have offshore states, they have offshore banking, they have many possibilities to use those channels to financing so-called states. And we agree, they need the states, and they have states.
With the growing trend of these organized crimes, how would you, as a leading member in these organizations, how do you advise these nations in those steps? Because, sometimes, yes, we see some stringent laws in many different countries, but sometimes that you don't really see a result being given back. Like, for example, Pablo Escobar, old example, but he was so influential. The only way he got, he was able to be removed was because, everyone else hated him. All the other, drug lords didn't like him. But how do you protect countries? Once they become really, really strong, it's just like, they have a very strong hold.
As I mentioned in the speech, organized crime is very connected. During the war in the Balkans, we had excellent cooperation among the criminals, including the war criminals. And they are very connected. They don't need the borders, they don't need the passports, they don't need the agreements. They just need the contacts and common interest. And they are doing that very fast and very adaptable. States need agreements, organizations, let's say ratifications, etc., etc. Luckily, the international cooperation, as I mentioned before, after September 11, is much better. We need global cooperation among the states to fight against organized crime. And that's the base problem for ISIS too. Ideology, I saw that on the Balkan. It's just, let's say, face for the good business. In every war, somebody will earn the money. Elites on the Balkans earn enormous money during the war on the Balkans. Enormous amount of the money. They became immediately millionaires using hyperinflation, using the war, robbery, monopoly on the main goods, etc., etc. During the war, you don't have the efficient states, this type of the war, who will control the system. And the elites are using that. And that's always possibilities to try to earn the money for the elites. I mentioned that in the war, in the speech. On the Balkans, the war is creation of elites, not ordinary people. They needed the war. They misused the religion. They misused the ethnic diversities. They misused the prejudice because they have not been ready to open the reforms, to change the societies, to establish democracy. It was easier to make enemies and to fight against them. It's always easier policy to face on with your former threats than to face on with your domestic issues. And new democracies, weak democracies are with weak elites misusing those occasions and creating this type of atmosphere. That's on the Middle East could be issue. And I mentioned in the speech, everybody expected after Arab Spring immediately to get democracy. In the middle of the Arab Spring, I told in Rome on the Parliamentary Assembly of Union for Mediterranean that I'm not expecting the democracy fast because we saw that on the Balkans. After one system, we didn't get democracy. We got a war and very painful period to try to establish democracy. Thanks to EU, we are capable to manage with that. Alone, we could not manage with that. Luckily, we have EU to integrate us, to accept us, and in some way to control us.
Thank you for your speech. I'm a student. I'm from Dubai. I'm a student at another university, but I'm studying with the Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed scholars. So the way you talked about Islam, about how it used to be very modern before, and how it had all of these inventions that we couldn't survive with. So now with all the corruptions that's happening, like, ISIS and all those minorities that are tainting the Islam. So what is your advice to us? Like, how can we change this? I mean, it's getting so bad with the media and with the threats that you see online and with the attacks that are happening in the name of Islam, which is, totally against the values of Islam. How do you think we can change this thing? I mean, it is going to be a very long process, but they're using our religion as, a face of terrorism, which is affecting everyone.
Yeah, we are wasting time. We have to start now to put the seed in the ground to get the fruits in the next 2 decades. I tell you an example from the Balkans, and it will be an analogy with the issues now with Islam. All my grandfathers fighting against Ottoman Empire. In that period, it was the symbol of Islam on the Balkans. And when I was in the reserve units in Yugoslav army, before attack on Dubrovnik, well-known place in Croatia, I left military units. I told them, it is not my war. Do you know what my mother told me? You are traitors. It's better to die than you left the unit. Because the prejudice has been there. That we have to fight for something. That Catholics and Orthodox are not so close. That Montenegrins are always fighting. And in Bosnia, they are Islamic, and the tradition is that we are fighting against Islam. We have to start, firstly, to put in our books different type of history. all of us just teaching how, in all books in Montenegro, you just read how we defeated Ottoman Empire, because we became important fighting with Ottoman Empire. We are a small country without this type of the history. We are nothing in history without Ottoman Empire. But we had to change our educational process to try to face on with the religion like not non-political category. That's our personal category. Beliefs are our private thing, not public thing. Beliefs are, religion is not our political things. If you have religion and politics, you are a loser, because you are fighting against prejudice, you are fighting against deep beliefs, you cannot communicate with those beliefs, and we have to make secular states if you'd like to keep the peace in Europe. Here, in Arab world, we have to create secular states. Religion is private, religion is your belief, religion is not acceptable for the politics. We have issues in Europe like here. We have a lot of prejudice. It's normal, because we are creating one type of the culture. We have to communicate for the future. I always try to explain to people in the OSCE, when I was there, we have Mediterranean Forum. We have the two coasts of the Mediterranean. On one side is 500 million of Arab nations. On the other side is half of us Europeans, mainly Christians, totally Christians probably. But very soon, we'll be together in the next few decades. Average age on your side of the Mediterranean is 23. Average age in Italy, 56. Could you believe that those parts of Mediterranean, small Mediterranean Sea, could be divided in the next few decades? We need new workers in economy. You need new jobs. You need new development here. We have to create now the possibilities to face on with that. I don't have answer now. I could not tell, let's create melting pot like in US, because it's quite a different situation. But we have to face on with that and to create that new reality for us in the next few decades. If my grandfather fought against Ottoman Empire, I was protector of Islamic population in Montenegro. I mentioned in my speech, our king has done something quite different than the others in the region in the 19th century. He fought with Ottoman Empire like priest. He was a priest in the same time. We were a theological state, Montenegro, until 1851. Orthodox, Christian, theological state. Ruler was bishop and king. But he was enough smart to keep Muslim population in Montenegro. No one mosque is destroyed in Montenegro, despite that we fought it 4 centuries. And now you have 132 mosques in Montenegro, despite that it's just 20%, 25% Muslims in Montenegro. But we have harmony and confidence. Could you believe? All those people voted for independence in Montenegro. All those people. Some of them came from the US, some of them came from Italy to risk to list the job. That needs the time. For the harmony, understanding, and confidence, you need the time. And that's the reason I'm insisting now to start to manage with that. To manage new confidence, new logic, new connections between Islam and Europe. I mentioned historically connections between Islam and Europe. Renaissance. I was fascinated how Renaissance started. All the antique writers has been in Arab language. We lost in Europe antique writers. Ibn Rushd translated them, and we used him to start Renaissance in Europe. Do you have in the books in Europe that? No, you don't have it in the books. You don't have that in the books. And we have to start to think about the positive part of our common history. Or I mentioned the great Mughal from India, Sultan Akbar, Elizabeth I. If she was enough brave to send a letter to one Islamic ruler in India, that thanks for his humanity, are we, after 5 centuries almost, enough clever to do the same, to start to think and to manage with that? Don't be the slaves of prejudice or wrong history. We are just learning how to defeat somebody. We have to start to learn how to cooperate with somebody.
How do you evaluate Tito and the former Yugoslavia? And how do you see the future of the Balkan states?
As you have seen, I have a very open mind and enough courage to to tell what I'm thinking. On the paper and out of the paper, that is the best period in economic and social development of all Yugoslav nations in their history. They have never seen so big development in economic and social level like that's 45 years. That's the numbers. You can compare the numbers 1945 and 1990. In everything. In the social care, in medical care, in education, in housing, etc., etc. I'll give just an example. We are not a rich country, but 90% of all houses in Montenegro owners are the Montenegrin citizens without loans, without, how to say in English, mortgages, without mortgages. If you compare with the others, we are rich because every apartment is more than 100,000 euros. But that's the heritage of Tito's period. And frankly speaking, if you ask me, elites on the Balkans just selling in the last 25 years what they created in the previous 45 years. That's portfolio development. You are selling something and you have the growth. That's it. We call that portfolio development. Normally, we didn't have the democracy, full democracy. Yugoslavia was open society. You can take a passport and go everywhere. No limits for passports. No limits to work all around. No limits to return in Yugoslavia. We had newspapers. We had Guardian during the touristical season or our coast. Normally, if you have an article about Tito's negative, it was not in the Guardian or New York Times. But you have some kind of the mixed system. And I visited China. They told that they believe that they are just following the Tito's logic of the system. Normally, I prefer democracy, multi-party system, freedom, medias, etc., etc. But for that period was obviously successful economic and social period. Not sustainable, obviously. Not solve the key issues like ethnic diversities, prejudice, lack of the religious tolerance, but he has done something like base for the future. We have to evaluate every period, to be honest, to evaluate this period. You have to see positive and negative things.
Your Excellency, if I could take advantage of having the mic and ask you one last question, because I know that with
I'm not good in poetry.
No, just one. At the OSCE PA, you were a spokesman for at the beginning of the Ukrainian crisis of diffusing that, and but I wonder if you can give us your insight or your feelings about how that will unfold, and whether it will unfold in the short term or the medium term to everybody's advantage, hopefully. I mean, I just would appreciate your thoughts on that, seeing as you were involved in the negotiations.
Yes, sadly, that's mutatis mutandis, we call in the law, the model of the Balkans, among the Slavic nations too, and the close nations too, Ukrainians and Russians. And before the war or occupation or annexion of the Crimea started, I told them, I met them in Vienna, I told them it will be the same like on the Balkans. And one of them is now the chief of security in Ukraine, Valentin. He told me no chance. We are not Yugoslavia, it will be different, no chance. Just months later on, it's happened. And when I visited them, I organized shuttle diplomacy in one day between Moscow and Kiev, 1st April last year. I met President of the Federal Council of Russia, Madam Matvienko, and President of the Duma, Narishkin. And next day I met the President, and he was in the same time acting President of the Ukraine. And I tried to explain them. But you know, if you're not practicing democracy, you are not capable for this type of the compromises. You're not capable to try to see that in the future you'll be the victim of your propaganda. You call that in political theory Taylor effects, that you are prisoner for your previous propaganda. And on some way it's happened with Russia and Ukraine. Both sides try to force hard words, to try to promise a lot for their nations, and try to show that it's fighting for dignity of the nations. It was terrible mistakes. I tried to explain that it is make a spiral of the wrong messages. And now we have the on the board of EU, on the board of Europe, we have the long-lasting crisis. In any case, it will be a long-lasting crisis. I could give you many elements, analogy between behavior of the both sides and the Yugoslav crisis. For me, it's just the pattern of the crisis. And it will be a long-lasting crisis. We will get many negative effects. We have instability in Ukraine. Soon we could get instability in Russia. And so on and so on. And it's, luckily we had excellent chairmanship in office of Switzerland, in OSCE, luckily. And they have done a lot, Madam. Your president and your Minister of Foreign Affairs has done a lot in this period. But, you know, this logic of ethnic obstacles and not enough efficient democracies, new democracies, let's word, is this type of the crisis terrible. You have this type of the societies on the East, including in some of the new European EU members, some of the new European EU members. And the spiral will continue. In any case, make weaker Ukraine and Russia, make more unstable, and it's an issue for all of us, not only for Europe, for all of us in the world. And I hope so that international community and primarily Russia now will stop the forcing of the negative decisions. That's the life interest of Russia. If you ask me, that's the life interest of Russia to stop with the negative decisions, and that they will try to make a deal. They have done it in the Minsk, and I hope so that it will final momentum. Now they pass too far, and I hope that they will turn at the beginning in the Minsk, and they will stop, and it will be the new base for the confidence and for the peace in Europe. Peace in Europe.
You know, I meet a lot of Ukrainians here and Bulgarians and now Montenegrins. They all love it here, which is interesting. They really do. But
yeah.
Anyway, I think it's been a real pleasure to hear your insights and for you to have given us so much of your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.